Welcome, listeners, to a brand new bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast. Today, brace yourself. We have a very exciting guest. We have author Lynne Kelly. Lynne, welcome to the program. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
There's so much to speak about with the books that you've written, but starting from the beginning, how on earth did you even get into writing?
I started writing when I was teaching. I taught special ed elementary school resource room for a few years. And when I got the idea for Chained, I should mention with both books, they started because of an animal I learned about and was fascinated by, and then later came up with who's the character who's going to have a connection to this animal. So that might be unusual that the main character comes later. So I got into both books first by the animal.
Oh, wow.
So when I got the idea for Chained, I was thinking at first, this will be something I could tell my students at school, because I could write this sort of as a picture book about this elephant who could just get home if only she knew she was strong enough to break free from this chain that holds her in place. And it grew from there. And I thought later, well, maybe this story is sort of good, and I could figure out how to write a whole book and how to get it published then. And so, of course, that took a long time. After that was about 6 years from idea to publication. So I think it's good I didn't know that going into it.
Yeah.
I don't know if think about starting something now and you're going to be finished with it in 6 years.
Yeah.
But that's what we do with every book we write. I thankfully found a good critique group right away, and had a lot to learn about writing and, of course, about publishing a book. And I was always a big reader, so that helps. But
yes.
Writing a story is a different skill. But I tell students all the time now, if you do want to write, then keep reading and read as much as you can. It helps us, I think, get to know good storytelling and get a feel for that.
Yeah.
So that did help. But also, in addition to finding a good critique group, I was thankful that one of those critique group members somehow recognized early on, this isn't a picture book. This looks like a story idea that needs to be a novel. You need the space in a novel. And I'm not sure how he recognized that, but I'm really happy he did. And of course, my first thought was, oh no, a novel, that's so many words.
Yes.
And now that I know more, I think, a picture book, that's so few words, that's so hard. Because I think a lot of people think, a picture book, that's so short, that's got to be so easy to write. Well, no, it's really hard to tell a story in like 200 words or 500 words, tell a compelling story and have a character that we're interested in following and we want to read over and over again. That's difficult. So now I know a picture book is hard to write, at least for me it is. And so it all started there with this story idea about an elephant who needs to break away and get home. And then, her keeper who, I came up with later, who also needs to do the same thing for himself, get away from this sort of rundown circus where they're stuck and get back to his own home. And then I, from there, found, I really like telling a story, even though this is taking a lot of time and a lot of work. I like seeing this idea go from idea to finished book and see what happens to these characters and how the story unfolds. Plus, I'd invested a lot of time in looking how to write a book. So hopefully, if you do that, you want to write more than one.
Yeah.
And I found I like this. So I'm kind of good at discovering things accidentally, just stumbling into things and finding out, I really love this. I want to continue doing this forever. And so writing is one of those things.
Wow. So how did you find out the elephant character? Well, okay, so there's two parts. One, however you found out about this elephant character, and then I guess moving from a picture book to a novel would also change the focus, that you actually needed a protagonist who wasn't necessarily an elephant. That also, did something like that occur also in the transition?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, where the idea came from in the first place, I was at a presentation having nothing to do with elephants or writing. But the speaker said, apparently when a young elephant is caught for something like a circus or a show to perform in, that elephant will struggle really, really hard to break free. And then once it gives up forever.
Oh, wow.
So then decades later, you could have this full-grown elephant still held in place by this little rope or chain, because it failed at that once. It's not going to try it again. It doesn't know it could break free from that.
Wow.
And so, of course, the speaker meant it metaphorically. Don't be like an elephant. As much as I love them, yes, if that's true about them, that's one way we should not be like an elephant if we fail at something. Not much would get done. I know no books would get written, for one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, of course, we continue trying until we do succeed. So that's where I thought, this will be a good illustration of something to tell the students at school. Here's what an elephant does when it fails, and we want to do something different. And so then, fast forwarding then to the critique group saying this needs the space of a novel to tell the story. Yeah, I didn't have a human main character at that point. It was all about this little elephant who needs to learn that she's strong enough to break free and run home. Might have been a fine picture book, but as I had it, it wasn't working.
Okay.
And so then I added the character who is her keeper. So 10-year-old Hostin, who leaves home to help out his family and get a job. And he ends up working as an elephant keeper, and then figures out pretty soon, their lives aren't too different, because he isn't a figure, or he isn't actually chained up like she is, but figuratively he's chained to this workplace and is not going to be allowed to leave. So, and these two friends become really close, but they'll have to work together and try to get away from there and back to their own homes.
Wow. Actually, when you explain the idea, the origin of the idea, it does sound like something that could have been a picture book. But I guess it's good it became a novel, because that set you on this course. So yay for everyone else.
Right.
Yay for other readers.
Yeah, and from there, then, of course, it was, okay, now I've got to figure out how to write this as a novel of about 50,000 words.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big planner still, but I do plan more than I used to, because it does take me a long time. And if I don't plan sort of some stepping stones ahead of me, I do like to discover the story as I write and see how that unfolds. But I can get lost in the wilderness if I don't have something to look ahead to.
Yeah.
And so at that time, then it was just writing one chapter to the next, what would happen, and without really knowing what was happening in the next chapter. I had an idea of the ending, which helps, because then I have a place to go. That did take a long time, because it was the first thing I wrote in large part. And I really didn't know what was going to happen in the story. Just wrote one chapter at a time and figured it out along the way.
And how much of a deep dive did you have to do to research about elephants? Or were you just looking for kind of bullet points? Because it's not a nonfiction, so it has to be accurate, but we don't have to know everything about elephants? Or did you have to go on a deep dive research on that?
Right, I did do some research on elephants, and also India, because I did set it in India, so that gave me some more homework there.
Yeah.
I set it there because I wanted the elephant to be caught from the wild and, as I mentioned, close to home, close enough to get there if she only could break away.
Right.
So it needed to be in a place where that could happen, where she could get back to her family she came from. So a lot of the research was about India, because I wanted that to look authentic, of course. And I feel like I knew about elephants, because I do love animals and have always loved animals. But I wanted to research more. So yes, even though it is a story, it's fiction, but I don't want anyone who knows more about elephants than I do to be stalked and, read something that looks wrong in the story. So I always want the reader to almost forget that they're reading a book and want it to seem realistic. So I did some research on elephants. I did some reading of articles and books and online sources. And in either case, like for the setting or for the subject matter, the best research I do is when I get to talk to people who know more than I do about it. So I visited the Houston Zoo a couple of times when they had these elephant open house events. So then we get to see the elephants up close, and I could talk to the keepers about what daily care they need and about their personalities, about the individual elephants, and gets to inform the setting that way, or the character's experience that way. And then for India, I felt like it was even more important to get that setting correct, because I did find that India is more like many countries within one instead of one country. Certainly not a homogeneous country.
Right.
One region to another is so different. And so I talked to a lot of people who had lived there and grew up there, and that was the best research I could do. There were things I never would have picked up from any amount of reading that I learned by talking to people who actually lived there.
Oh, I don't know if you had, this is kind of totally random, but the first time I saw an elephant, like as an adult up close, I had this moment of like, it doesn't really look like the way it does in books.
Oh,
Something else comes over you when you see it like live up close. Do you kind of know what I'm saying?
oh, I didn't have that experience. Maybe because I did see them, like in zoos growing up. But
Right.
what did surprise me is how squishy they are. 'Cause, at these events, we got to touch an elephant, and it was almost like a spongy feel that I didn't expect. I thought, they look so, I don't know, like they would be certainly rough. The skin is rough, but I didn't expect that sort of squishiness when I touched them.
Right, because I think that's what it was. When I saw the skin, I was like, oh, that it did look very rough. Or something. Then also
Yeah,
the adult with the more hair on them, you're like, wow, it doesn't look as soft as I was thinking. But that's funny that you
right,
said about
right.
the feel of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for Song for a Whale, it seems like that sort of happened the same way. You somehow found out about a unique sort of whale, and then you built a story around that as well.
Right. So this one, so for Song for a Whale, it was about not whales in general, more like Chained was about elephants in general, but about a specific whale known as the lonely whale. So this is based on a real animal in real life known as the 52 hertz whale or 52 blue. And this is a whale that sings at a frequency so much higher than other whales. So this one in real life sings at a frequency of around 52 hertz. For us humans, that's a low tuba note. So it's really
Oh,
low for us, but apparently for a whale, that's so screechingly high, they can't even understand him. So
wow.
most baleen whales like this, like say a blue whale, for example, would sing at around 10 to 20 hertz. So much, much lower. And
Wow.
those are sounds that are so low, we humans don't even use them. And I was fascinated right away and wondered why, for one, why does this whale sing such an unusual song? And is it aware that it's so different and that it continued for so long? This whale was discovered in the late 1980s. Might have been around longer than that, but that's the first time someone heard this unusual song and identified it as a whale song, but a strange one. And then I was just so fascinated. Does it continue singing because it's waiting for something to sing back, or is it just singing because that's what whales do? And likely that's what it is. That's just
Right.
in the nature of being a whale, they sing. Hopefully it's just perfectly happy singing its own song. All these impossible questions to answer that came up, and I just kept thinking about this whale and what his life is like and why he is out there singing his own language, and knew pretty quickly this was an idea that wasn't going to let me go.
Yeah.
So we look for those as writers. Ideas are everywhere, and once in a while you have one that just clings to you and you can't stop thinking about. So this is how I was with this whale, just wondering about him. And so I knew, like, okay, I need to write something about him. I don't know what the story is, but I need to write something. And so I did that, and then thought, yeah, I need to write a story about this. And now, again, I need a character. So who's someone who is so fascinated by this whale? She's not just going to sit at home and read about him like I was.
Yeah.
A character to do something, obviously, and try to solve a problem that seems impossible. Who would feel such a connection? They'd have to try to find him or try to track him down in some way. And so there I came up with my character Iris, who, as the only deaf kid at school, I knew she would feel a strong connection. When she learns about this whale, she's someone who would think, I understand that song that he's singing. And then she will come up with a plan to reach out to him. And then eventually that plan ramps up to actually trying to find him and track him down.
Right. That story is also interesting because you have Iris kind of fix his radio so she sort of understands sound, even though she can't really hear sound. That was like an interesting thing to bring in. And so I was like, did she also have to research all this sound stuff?
I kind of did, yes. Now, some people ask, is Iris based on anyone in particular? And like most characters, Iris is made up of many people I've known or met, and some of myself. I think we always, put ourselves and, many people we've known into our characters.
Yeah.
That radio repair hobby is based on one person, is inspired by one person. And that was an adult student I interpreted for from his freshman orientation day in college until his graduation day, and is now an electrical engineer, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But he had said when he was a kid of like 12 years old, he was the kid people would bring their broken electronics to, and that might have been a radio built in 1950 or an old tube television. And it didn't matter that he couldn't hear the sound, couldn't hear the program or the music playing when it was repaired. He knows what an electrical circuit should look like, and he can tell what parts need replacing and what should be wired where. And he just enjoyed fixing stuff, and continued that hobby and through adulthood. And I thought all along, that's an interesting hobby really for anyone now to be working on technology that old, and especially for a kid, and then to lead to kind of a job for him, repairing broken electronics for people.
Yeah.
And on top of that, a deaf kid who can't hear the sound that's playing when it's done, but just knows that it's fixed and it's ready to go. And so I gave that to Iris, not knowing at first how important that would become in solving her problem in the story. But at first I thought, well, it's an interesting way to show she is a smart and creative girl when it's harder for people to see that at school, when almost nobody can communicate with her very well. But when she is at home and in her room where she really feels at home, surrounded by all this stuff that looks like junk to most people, there's where she is really herself and where she's happiest, when she's repairing these old radios. And then I thought, it's a good connection to the song that doesn't match up with others being important for the whale, and why he has a life that's in isolation also. And then later, I came up with a way that she would use that skill closer to the end of the story that would come in handy.
That does come together very beautifully, yes. That was also interesting that you chose to include a few chapters from the whale's POV. Was any of that sort of what you had originally in mind and then you just figured to keep it, or it just seemed natural as you were writing the story to put those in?
Those were some of the first chapters I wrote just because of how I came into the story, learning about this lonely whale. And when I first started writing down the ideas for the story and thinking about what his life is like, that's sort of how I got into the story. So it made sense to keep those. I knew early on the whale wasn't going to be the main character of the story. I wanted a human who feels this connection and wants to try to track him down. But I did want to sort of check in with the whale and see what's he up to and how is he doing, and is he getting closer or farther away from our protagonist here, and then to show those parallels in their lives.
Yeah, wow. And also that you chose to do this for middle grade because, well, I guess either of your stories could have been old. It could have gone older technically, but
it could.
Was middle grade was it a specific choice or just sort of happened?
That is an audience I love writing for. And yes, I could have aged up the character. It would have been a little different story.
Yeah.
Like Iris could accomplish more on her own if she were older, like an older teenager. I really connect to this age. And I think that like this middle grade age, when most of us think about our favorite books growing up or our first favorite books that made us love reading, we often think of those middle grade novels. Like we go back to something like Charlotte's Web or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Phantom Tollbooth, these books that were the first favorites that we chose ourselves to read. So, and I really love that audience. And this is an age too where we are starting to make our own choices and, deciding who am I friends with. So there's this shift, from you have your play dates with who your parents, set you up with, who's nearby, who do you live near. And then, you get a little bit older and you're starting to make those decisions more on your own. Which group am I going to be friends with and where are my people? And what kind of person am I going to be? It's the age where we start making that decision every day. What choice am I going to make and who am I going to be and how am I going to respond? And I think it's a really interesting age to be. And I love this age and this audience.
It's also some of the first books you can really read entirely by yourself, I guess, also. So that probably also has an impact.
Right, that's exciting too.
Yeah, and it was interesting, even though it's not like a main focus of the book, but that Iris has the choice between these two schools. Because on the one hand, you want her to be with friends or with others that are like her in the sense that she doesn't have to explain or
Yeah.
navigate the differences, but at the same time, you're like, but I also want you to be able to be friends with the other people as well. So
Right.
that was just an interesting thing that was added in there because you can see why it could be a struggle for her to be in a regular school where, like, the one girl that you added in who sort of makes up sign language because she thinks she knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just want to shake the girl and you're like, can you just stop? But at the end, she's
Right.
like, no, I'm actually going to learn sign language. You're like, well, that's a good thing that just happened. So,
Right. I know people, there are some people who think Iris should have been kinder to Nina. Sure, she shouldn't have shoved her so hard. But also, if someone is just invading our space over and over again, I mean, there comes a point where you would maybe snap, like
yeah,
she does, and you have to stand up. We need our boundaries, right?
yeah,
And there's a healthy, perhaps there's a healthier way to set that boundary than shoving someone, hopefully. But she tried. She really tried to set that boundary
yeah,
and wasn't being heard.
yeah.
So, but honestly, if I were a say 12-year-old and had a deaf classmate, I might have been the Nina. I might have been the one who was just so excited to show off what I knew, what I
Right,
thought I knew.
right.
I might have been that.
Yeah.
I understand her.
Iris is also 12, so you could say, oh, she should have been kinder, but she's also 12. She's not always going to be making, even as adults, we don't always make the
Oh,
exact right
right.
decision. Yeah.
Right. Our characters have flaws too, just like real people. We don't always handle things perfectly. We don't always make the best choice, and that's part of the journey of a story too. We see a character who has flaws, and they have fears, and those flaws and fears get in the way of them achieving what they want.
Yeah. And it was also interesting that you added in the grandmother who also has the same situation sort of as Iris does. Instead of sending her with an adult or with a group of friends that might be able to hear better or might be able to, they're not specifically like her. So they're both kind of going on this journey, both in the same, but also from the same place almost, in the sense that it would fascinate them a whale that doesn't hear the same or that doesn't sound the same. I think you added at the end that it's not necessarily genetic. So that kind of situation of having the grandparent. Did I understand that correctly?
Oh, sure. You mean like in the back matter where
Yeah.
I wrote more about deafness?
Yeah.
Right. It isn't so common for someone to have hereditary deafness.
Okay. Right.
But I did want Iris to be one of those who does have hereditary deafness. For one, I thought it might be a little too depressing if she can't communicate with anyone at school, can't communicate well with anyone at home. And most importantly, though, it might give people unfamiliar with deafness the impression that, oh, this is such a sad existence she has, this poor deaf girl. She can't talk to anyone, and certainly she must wish that she could hear. That was really important for me to avoid that. It would have been a natural assumption if I had no other deaf people for her to interact with. A lot of readers would get that impression that this is such an awful existence. Overwhelmingly, with deaf people that I've met, that isn't the case, that they wish they could hear. Despite the challenges, despite communication barriers, they would not change and become hearing if they could. So I wanted to show Iris as a proud deaf girl who, yes, she gets annoyed and she has these challenges, but that's not something about her she would change. That's part of who she is. And so with that relationship with Grandma, that really helped to get that through, I think, because we see the contrast in what her life is like at school, where she can't communicate with anyone very well except her interpreter. And I think, if I were 12 and there's one adult in my whole school I can communicate with and really no students, that doesn't sound like much fun. And then at home where she can communicate better, there's still some tension. But then when she's with Grandma, who shares that experience and shares that language with her, what a difference that makes.
Yes.
And we can see this is a part of her life where she experiences joy. And they have this rich language that is as flexible and as rich as any other. They can converse, they can have deep conversations, they can play around with it and tell jokes and tell stories. And so with that relationship, I wanted to hopefully show this is part of her life that's very satisfying. And it makes a big difference when she is with someone who shares that experience. And we get an idea of what she could have if she could go to a school where there are other deaf people. And we see that through her friend Wendell, a little bit of a disconnect too, since they don't interact with the same people. She doesn't interact with young people much. And, like with any language, there are differences between young people and old people. And with those, then we see, here's what she could have if only she were around people who share her experience and her language.
Right. Well, that's also, it's kind of almost subtle that, first of all, the fact that she has a grandmother shows that the grandmother who is deaf and married to someone who is deaf, they have a regular life, just a little bit different, but it's still a regular life. And then her friend who communicates differently with his friends, it just shows that even that could be a dynamic language almost, that they can have their own expressions for certain things that she might not be familiar with because because like you said, she's only speaking to adults, and she realizes that as younger individuals, they'll come up with their own kind of slang, even if it is hand language slang or whatever. So, or sign language. Yeah, that was an interesting, just like little details. That was kind of an interesting thing to see.
Right, because there's diversity within the population itself. So like with any population of people you can think of, they aren't homogenous. There's diversity within the group. So just those couple of relationships, I wanted to show that too. There's a different experience each person has.
This is just a side question, which it might be a little bit clumsy in asking, but I hopefully the question will come across correctly. I spoke to a picture book writer for a couple episodes ago, and she was talking about one of the picture books that she wrote. So it's for kids, but it's about dealing with kids who have differences, I guess. So one of the things she mentioned was that, for example, if there's someone who's blind, when you come into the conversation, you introduce yourself. If there's a conversation going on, you come in and you say like, "Oh, hi, I just entered the conversation." So that way they know that there's someone else there. They can't see you. Is there some sort of equivalent like that? Because a deaf person can see you, but are there? I don't know if it would be I don't know what the word would be. Some sort of like courteousness or something like that for when you enter into a conversation with a deaf person that you're not trying to they don't get thrown off, or I don't know what the wording would be.
Right, I would say because they can see you. So I would say there are cultural differences. So not so much, like that where you have to, announce yourself. There's not a need for that in entering a conversation. Right. But introductions take longer. Saying goodbye takes a long time. And I think I had that in there, that when they start to say goodbye, it can go on for half an hour. Yeah. For one, I think because, deaf people don't often get to interact with other deaf people, at least historically, and with many of them. So when they do see other deaf people, and especially if they haven't seen each other for a while, the goodbye can take a long time. So you're going to be there a while if you're waiting for deaf people who've not seen each other for a while to say their goodbyes. And in an introduction, there'll be more backstory to that. They'll indicate whether they were born deaf or became deaf later, if they have deaf family members, maybe where they went to school. So introductions can be longer. So that's one thing. And then the same thing, if they're meeting you, they would want to know what's your story? Do you have deaf parents, and where did you go to school? Where did you grow up? So that's what I'm thinking of that might compare to that, is that introductions will take longer.
Is it, okay, this is probably also another clumsy question, but I think I might be self-conscious about what I'm doing with my hands then if I'm speaking to someone who's deaf. Or if they know I don't speak sign language, they don't even care what my hands are doing. They're probably just reading my lips at that point.
It could be, or if you have an interpreter there, they'd be looking at the interpreter. So,
right.
I guess if you were maybe trying to sign something, they might be watching to see, are you signing something? Or is that just you?
Yeah.
Gesturing. So maybe like that, but it wouldn't be, I can't think of anything that would be considered rude like that. They might just be looking to see, are you trying to sign something?
Right. Going from one language to another, you always have that moment of, did I pronounce that correctly? And did I just insult someone by saying it incorrectly? But I have to add, the cover for Song for a Whale, I think, is one of the most beautiful covers I've ever seen.
Yes. The artist Leo Nichols did that. And I was so happy with it. And I didn't even know that he was able to do the cover until I saw it.
Wow.
My editor showed me a few different illustrators that they were thinking of for the cover, and that doesn't always happen, even that the author has any input to the cover. So that was nice that I got to see who they were thinking of.
Yeah.
And he was our favorite. Just saw some samples of covers that other covers he had done, hoping that he would be able to do this one. And then I didn't know until I got the cover that he was the one doing it. And I was amazed. I was so happy with it. The draft that I got is almost the same as the final cover. It was, I think, just the font changed because it was kind of a cursive-y font. And I said, a lot of young students don't read cursive anymore. So let's use a different font so the title's clear. I think just that, and then like the little figure of the person at the top, that positioning changed. That was about it. So when I got it was pretty much final, and it's stunning. So yeah, I'm so fortunate that they got him to do it, and that he did such gorgeous work on that.
Yeah, it's the colors, it's the drawing, it's everything. I think the cover probably caught my eye. One of the first things about the book was, wait, what is that book? Don't let it go anywhere. I need to see this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had to point out to me, I didn't notice at first, like the yellowish, it's like pine trees and their reflection across the top. Those are sound waves. So he drew those as sound waves.
Oh, okay. I have to go back to the cover now.
They double as the pine trees and their reflection in the water.
Yeah, that needs to be a canvas, that cover. Okay. It's magnificent. Okay. Oh man. Okay, just watching the time here. So, not because I want to, but we're going to wrap up just to keep everything nice and compact. I always finish off with that question, the fill in the blank of, I love it when writers, authors, editors, agents, publishers, books, etc. do blank, and I really don't like it when blank. So how would you fill in the blank for those?
Oh, so this, what I love, well, and this would be editors or anyone who offers editorial feedback. So critique partners or agents who are editorial. I love it when they can explain something that isn't quite working in the story without telling you how to fix it, but it leads you to come up with a way to make it work. Where they can, some people have that skill where they can see like a big picture thing in a story that needs to change, and they can draw out of you a way to make that better.
Yes.
I had that like with coming up with how Iris's skill would come up again at the end. That was my friend Crystal Allen, who's also a great middle grade writer, had said, yeah, we need to see that again near the end. I was going, I don't know. She's on a cruise ship. How's she going to, she has no radios to fix, and she's really good at brainstorming. And then it was later, I went, oh, of course that has to happen. And here's how I can do that. So someone like, and really the editor of Song for a Whale, Kate Sullivan, is really good at that. And pointing out where things weren't working, if the plot point wasn't clear or seemed out of the blue, or character didn't seem quite so strong, or, oh, here's this whole like Alaskan bush people family you put in here, they need to die. So where you look at that and think, oh no, that's an impossible change to make. And then later, oh wait, now I see, yes, of course that wasn't working. And now here's how I can fix it. So when people are able to give feedback like that, that is the big picture about the story, and leaves you the space to figure out how that can work. That's my favorite thing. And of course, any kind of promotion or cheerleading from anybody, whether it's the publisher throwing promotion behind it, because realistically, they can't do it for every book. There's a finite amount of time and money and other resources. So any promotion they can do, and that readers can do, if they just tell people about a favorite book or leave a review or request it at their library or bookstore, all of that is fabulous. That all goes to support authors and to spread the word about books that you love.
Yep. Wait, so that's actually good. I just want to clarify something. Even as an author and as a published author, you still have your critique people that you'll swap pages or manuscripts with.
Oh, for sure. And I was so delighted to finally see my critique group again the other night. We just met for dinner now. We hadn't seen each other, for probably 15 months.
Wow.
And so, yes, we'll pick up again. We'll continue meeting every 2 weeks and trade chapters. So yeah, we still do that even after getting published, because it's hard to see it on your own work. It's almost like if you're trying to read a book when it's an inch from your face, you're too close to see the story.
Yep.
And another pair of eyes can find, things in there that, made perfect sense in your head, but they aren't making sense on paper. You need other people to read it and point that out to you, that it isn't working.
Absolutely.
And they, often have suggestions for how it might work, or can kind of lead you down the path that you need to be on.
Absolutely. Do you have a fill in the blank for things that you don't necessarily like?
Oh, sure. Yeah, this was harder to come up with, actually. But I guess, one thing I thought of, the opposite of like cheerleading books. If anyone, when people disparage like a whole category of books, like a whole age group or genre.
Yeah.
So I don't mean like, a particular book wasn't for you and you want to give it a review that isn't great, or tell people you didn't like it. That's one thing. But then if people just want to punch down a whole category, like, people who read YA are immature, or there aren't any good books for children out there, that lets people know you don't read much. there are plenty of good books out there.
Yes.
Thankfully, always room for more good books. But anyone who says, there aren't any good fantasy books, or there aren't any good children's books, or whatever, fill in the blank, whatever category, that lets me know, well, you haven't read enough in that category then. And, okay, not every book is for everyone, or not every genre is for everyone. You don't like it, it's okay.
Yeah.
Other people like it. There's no reason, to put down a whole category of books, or the people who read them too. So I think that would be it. If someone just has a blanket statement about an entire category of books that is bad.
That's so true. I've actually asked this of a few authors, because I spoke to one author once who said that she's written YA and adult, and she says that it wasn't until she wrote an adult novel that people are like, oh, now you're a real author. Do you get that as a middle grade author? Because I've read your book and I'm like, this is a real author. So
yeah, not as much. Almost good. Like, are you going to graduate and write adult books now? Well, I mean, kids are picky readers, and they will not stick with you as long as an adult will. I think most adults are more patient. We'll stick with a book for maybe 50 pages before we abandon it because it's not good.
Yes.
A middle grade reader is not going to stick with you for 50 pages if they are bored. And if they just don't like the story, you're not going to hang on to them that long. So you'd have to grab their interest right away. So, they're just different audiences to write for. And, this is what I love. It's not to say I won't ever write for any other, but this is where I really feel like I fit, and where the stories I come up with fit.
Well, if you don't have to go into too much detail. When you're looking for your next story, do you look first for the animal now, or are you looking for... Because your two first stories, you found the animal first and then the story. So, or did you just wait for the idea to come to you?
Right. I kind of keep a list of ideas, but it always seems like there's an animal in there at least somewhere. But so what I'm revising now actually is again about an animal.
Oh.
More generically, but probably I'll have an animal in there in some way. And it just seems like those are the ideas I'm drawn to, and things about the natural world that fascinate me, and especially our connection to the natural world, like how our lives, or the way we communicate, compares to the animal world. It seems like where my interest is. So for now, and again, I won't say I won't ever write a book with an animal. It could happen. At least there'll be a dog, something. I don't know. I love animals so much, and they fascinate me. So I would think they'll always be in there in some way. But sometimes too, then I might think of a character. Like I might think of here, what would it be like to be, this kid who's, going through, this particular thing, or, whose parents are so different from him. And here's this compassionate kid who is not surrounded by compassionate adults. What is that life like? And now what's his story? So I do have characters I think of too, but I'm always noticing, fascinating things about the natural world that I think could find their way into a story.
Well, considering that your first book is about an elephant and then the other book is about a whale, so two very large mammals, if you do end up with a book about a hamster, I might have to look twice at who the author is.
Oh, right.
But who knows? Who knows what it will be? But it's going to be exciting to find out what comes next. So, awesome. Well, anyways, Lynne, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, I love chatting with you.
This was a bonus episode featuring author Lynne Kelly. To find out more about Lynne and her work, please check the link in the episode notes. To find out more about Oh My Word Podcast and all the great stuff we're up to, please follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word Podcast. Check us out at el10about.com. Thanks so much for joining us. Catch you next time.